Former White House Chief of Staff, senior partner now at Conservative Partner Institute, and a guy who's filing a lawsuit against Nancy Pelosi, which let's just pause for a second and revel in that news. Mark Meadows is with us. Hi, Mark.
It's great to be with you. Thanks so much, and thanks for always bringing the truth to the American people.
I try, Mark, and I know that you served Donald Trump very, very well. He used to always say, "This guy never stops working," and I know that to be true. Tell me what's going on, because first you said you weren't going to testify January 6th, right?
Well, there was a whole lot that was actually written about what was happening and what was not happening, just to be blunt. And I can tell you that from day one, what we said was we were always going to honor the president's executive privilege. It's not my privilege to waive. I'm not going to be the first chief of staff to waive it. I don't think that compelling his chief of staff to come to Congress to testify is something that historically has ever been done, and certainly is not a good precedent to start. That being said, we've been in negotiations for several weeks and months, being very clear that the president's executive privilege would always be protected. We tried to reach an accommodation. We were working on that accommodation, providing some of the documents. Then it became very apparent that they were going to continue to ask about conversations that I had with either the president or other senior staff as it related to some of those non-privileged documents. And then over the last 72 hours or so prior to filing the lawsuit, a subpoena arrived where they were actually looking for all of the communication from my personal cell phone device, subpoenaing my carrier, and when that happened, it became very obvious that they were not going to put any limits on what they were looking for, and the overreach, the constitutional overreach, in my opinion, was just not where I could voluntarily come in and participate for a deposition.
And we also know, we know they've already made up their minds on what happened. They did this with Donald Trump in the impeachment, and it was grotesque what they did. But the critics, CNN would say that, well, what do you have to hide, Mark? What is it that you're hiding? Why won't you share all these things? Can you explain why presidential privilege is so important, not just for this president, but for presidents down the road?
Well, for every president, and certainly for every chief of staff, it's not only that. They say, well, what do you have to hide? I've publicly have stated that, to my knowledge, no one in the West Wing had any advanced knowledge that there would be a breach of security at the Capitol on January 6th, and I've shared that publicly and privately. But at the same time, to have them have me come in and say, well, what did you tell the president? What was your conversation? At this point, what it does is just empowers them. And you're right. All of the people on the January 6th Commission have all voted for impeachment. So I don't know that they're neutral arbiters of the truth. As you know, I've got a new book out, The Chief's Chief, and they said, well, you talk about things in The Chief's Chief, and the subject matters in there are not the intimate conversations that a chief of staff would have with the president of the United States. And so for me, it is far too expansive. And I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, truthfully, Glenn. I mean, when you really look at this is what courts are for. if this is something that the courts would believe is constitutional and should weigh in, should a current president, be able to waive the executive privilege of a previous president, it would set, in my mind, a very dangerous precedent where just different parties would then essentially use both Congress and this waiver to actually just look at political opponents, and it's just not what our founding fathers, I think, envisioned.
Mark, I've talked to Mike Lee about this, and I've always disagreed with this until I talked to Mike. I said, why didn't we go after Nixon? Why didn't we go after Hillary Clinton? And he said, it's really distasteful, but he said, I think it's right. He said, once you open that can of worms on your opponent after they left office, he said, that's what happens in banana republics. He said, because then it will be used for sheer political purposes to destroy the other party or the other candidates of the future. And he said, I think it's just way too dangerous to do that. Do you agree with that?
Well, it is. I do, and there's sometimes when you're in power that you would love to have the ability to use the law and the rules to your point, and Senator Lee is right there. I mean, I'm not one to basically put a motive behind a particular individual, but I am here to say that I do know, and obviously for filing the lawsuit against Speaker Pelosi and the January 6th committee is it needs to have legitimate legislative purpose. It can't be just a fishing expedition. In the broad scope of everything that appears that they're looking at, it's troubling. Now, some of those questions are not going to get answered in this lawsuit. Should Congress have the ability to subpoena just about everybody's record? Well, that becomes a dangerous path to go down as well. But certainly this question of executive privilege and the broad scope of what they're doing would have a chilling effect on future chiefs of staff and senior advisors to the President of the United States in any future administration. Can you imagine, all of a sudden a Republican president in 2024, and then there's a subpoena for Joe Biden's chief of staff and all his personal records and official records as well. So this is what courts are designed to do. We felt like that this particular lawsuit was necessary to at least bring the question and hopefully have the courts weigh in on it. Yeah. Whether it changes my outcome or not, I don't know. I mean,
I think this is perfectly reasonable for people to understand that. Because when you say that about Joe Biden, if there's something criminal that was going on, I would want to talk to the chief of staff. But I would also want it to be very, very narrow. It's kind of like a search warrant. You can't just kick my door down and say, yeah, we're looking for stuff. You have to say, right. I know that we believe this is here and this specifically is what we're looking for. And if the courts decided that, well, and they should. But here's the interesting point, Glenn, and it's important that you put that criminal component there. That's a law enforcement issue. That would Correct. Be an issue for the FBI or other law enforcement entities. That's not under the purview of Congress to do law enforcement. Theirs is strictly legislative. And so when you look at that, there are already provisions for sharing of information if fraud or criminal activity took place. And so I appreciate you making the distinction because that is a significant one. But again, I'm not an attorney. I can tell you this, that hopefully the courts will weigh in and that they will look at this, and that's what they're set up for do. When there's a dispute between the executive and legislative branch, hopefully they will weigh in a real way. Do you? I was trying to think about this from your perspective this morning, and I trust Congress and the FBI and everybody there's no trust left in me on these things. It's all become political to me. And I know testifying in front of Congress, they have anything they want to do, they can do. And you're in trouble. They decide you're in trouble, you're in trouble. But more importantly, they destroy people's reputations. Howard Hughes is one of the only ones that I know that came out unscathed in something like this. Do you worry that because they can't get Donald Trump, because there's nothing there, that they are just looking for someone to hang this on, even if they can't really prove it, they need a bad guy's head?
Well, obviously, again, I don't want to ascribe motives to particular members of Congress, but the political nature is not lost on me. Obviously, when you look at that, I think that you can tell from some of the public comments that members of the January 6th committee have already made, continue to make. This is more of a political narrative than it is a legislative one, and there's a lot of people claiming the fifth, and or at least I'm reading about that. For me, I felt like it was important from a constitutional standpoint that we fight back on this executive privilege and the scope of this investigation. Listen, I trust in the Lord, and that's where I put my trust. And I can tell you, at this point, I'm fervently praying. Congress will do what they typically always do, and overreach is one of those attributes.
So when the courts decide, if they decide you have to testify, you will testify. You have to testify,
obviously they're the neutral arbiter in all of this. Certainly in sharing that, I think that many of the Democrat members of Congress will be very disappointed with the facts and what actually happened, with regards to, President Trump and his team. And at the same time, I think that they're going to move ahead with contempt and hold me in contempt before that. I'm hopeful that the courts will weigh in.
All right. Mark Meadows, best of luck.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, and thank you for you and all your listeners, and really appreciate it.
You got it. We'll keep you in our prayers. Mark Meadows, former White House chief of staff, who has just filed a lawsuit against Pelosi and the January 6th committee members. Let the Supreme Court decide whether or not executive privilege should be violated for this.